Hello and welcome to another episode of Mordred's Community Multiplayer, political recap chat, joined by a new co-host this week, Rebel Thunder. How's it going?
It's going pretty good. I'm happy to be here.
And
Uh,
how do you pronounce your nation's name?
Jordan?
Jordan. Okay. And you are one of our New World nations, our only current hegemon. How
That's
have things been
currently
going
not
for you?
growing. Um, well, not the greatest, because I'm currently in a war where I did stack wipe a whole Vern cannon stack, but I did, if you look at my armies, get sent back at the end of the session.
Yeah, it looks like you've got
But,
about 130 to reinforce, so in quite the war with Vern and Eberthil down in, we'll call it your southern holdings.
yeah.
Any
And then,
concerns about your navy getting kicked out to sea if these sieges continue to, or these battles continue to go poorly?
yeah, that is the main concern, because currently, like, I have a lot of ships, but Everthill's ideas are just really dumb. And I just can't compete. They have 20% heavy ship combat ability on me, 20% naval morale on me. Well, not just 20%, they have a whole 2 morale over me in the Navy.
Yeah, pretty significant in naval combat because of the multiplier associated with morale and reducing damage taken. Even more so than on land combat, naval morale makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, looking at it, you're,
Being Ruinborn doesn't help.
yep, nope, doesn't help at all. So outside that, New World, quite a bit of action this past session, primarily focused around Boy Scarvo. Um, Obviously, they supported Bjarnrik in the war against Laurent and Vern, um, and then re-entered after accepting a white peace a number of years later to try to relieve the pressure. Bjarnrik eventually pieced out, giving up their colony to Laurent. So Boy Scarvo got, I don't know if hung out to dry is the right word, but Laurent and Vern were able to pivot and focus their attention on Boy Scarvo, uh, pretty close to being able to stab Vern out of the war, but looks like
Yeah.
things might not be going so well for Boy Scarvo. What's your take?
Um, so yeah, I'd hoped that Bjarnrik would have stayed fighting a bit longer considering we rejoined the war, but or at least till we could start stab hitting and sending peace offers to Vern. But because I don't think we can. If we're gonna win this war, it's gonna be through stab hits. Like we're not gonna get any huge war score. But I understand Bjarnrik leaving because small country joining did put the forces to essentially 2-1 in the old world.
And
And oh, sorry.
nope, not a problem. Let's touch on that larger war a little bit. Bjarnrik and Arbaran went toe to toe with Laurent and Vern for the majority of the session. Laurent and Vern had a slight advantage from a manpower and professionalism perspective, but Bjarnrik and Arbaran seemed to be able to hold on. It looks like they're starting to both recover now. Obviously, still a little bit in the hole manpower wise for each of them. Professionalism still relatively low. How long is it going to take them to recover from that war?
Fully recover, it's gonna at least be like an entire session. But to recover to a point where they could maybe rejoin, I think, well, could you check how long their truce is with y'all?
Looks like they've got 9 years left.
They could be in fighting position by that point if they wanted to join a war. I don't see why they really would need to at the current point, or if they would even want to, depending on how badly it's going for either side in the other war, or if even if it's still going on.
And then a few other wars obviously occurred throughout the session. Cyranovar, for all intents and purposes, put the final nail in the coffin of Marhold. We knew that was coming to some degree, but they also took an opportunity to move in against the Lake Fed and relieve some pressure from their longtime ally, the Phoenix Empire. Did it surprise you that after a relatively costly war for Siranavar, where their manpower is relatively low, professionalism as well, that they jumped back in against the Lake Fed so quickly.
They probably not seen how the Phoenix Empire, I mean, they were fighting to a standstill with just themselves and Ovdog Kanza to some extent. But with Stanavar joining, they don't really have to fight too many battles. Like, Lake Fed can't realistically hold both fronts against their full forces, even with Saranavar's lack of manpower.
And then looks like Siranavar taking another big chunk out of Corvuria here. With the way things are shaping up between Vern, Laurent, Arbrand, Bjarnrik, is there anything to stop the Wood Elves from expanding in whichever direction they so choose at this point?
With the Phoenix Empire support, I would say there's not much stopping them, especially with all this huge conflict going out in the New World, which now the mod currently is Vern with their almost 700 force limit. Might be able to do something if they don't send all their troops over, but
And then it looks like the Greeks have, at one point, they were allied with Marhold. It looks like they continue to be allied with Marhold, but have not yet sent any armies into the Old World. Do you anticipate them getting involved in Old World affairs at any point over the next couple of sessions?
I mean, theoretically, they could. They still have to get a lot of maps, which is the same position I am. But against the Wood Elves, like helping Marhold, which I don't know if Oster's coming back to Marhold, but helping them, there's not much they can do because how are they going to really realistically get to the deep woods? But Chaos is probably the one tag that can actually fight Everthil on an almost even playing field in Navy.
And is
So it's,
that from their national ideas, the own coast
yeah,
bonus, etc., and the heavy ship combat ability?
yeah. They're still lacking morale and they don't have the, I think it's minus 50% naval maintenance that Everthil gets for some reason.
Yeah, Eberthel's ideas are pretty heavily focused towards that naval combat, and now that they fully completed the naval idea group, are moving through quality, it's going to be interesting to see if anyone's able to take them down. And then a few other wars to mention. Ismaria and Abencost took advantage of some of the other ongoing conflicts, moved in against Jaberd, who was allied to Adenica, a small country, um, and formed a new tag, obviously, Conwell being the old
Yeah.
tag. How much more conflict do you see internally within the Empire between potentially Ismaria, Abencost versus Jaberd and small country? Or do you think that the emergence of some of these outside threats, like the Wood Elves getting a little stronger, may unify the Empire?
Maybe Ismaria sees keeping Jabert around as like helpful to stop someone. But I will say if I were them, I would definitely want to probably kill Jabert since they've just sat there and devved like the same 7 provinces all game and now it's just insane.
Yeah, pretty
Like I think
valuable
that
land here. Yeah, quite high dev.
I
And
guess maybe they're keeping him around and they're gonna like ally them just so they have some of the gnomish bonuses. That's the only reason I could see them staying alive.
yeah, it could be helpful having gnomish cannons in the back line of conflicts moving forward. Does it surprise you how much AI remains in the Empire between Vern, Eberthil, and Ismaria? There's still quite a few AI nations there. Is that surprising to you?
Yes. They're realistically it's 1625. There really shouldn't be anything left. It's at the stage where coalitions don't really matter either, because there's unless players are actually going to join one for some reason, there's not really enough AI left to join one, because most of it's either vassals in the north at least. That's all Bjarnrig vassals still, I'm pretty sure.
Yep. And then Gowit, obviously, Arbrand
Yeah.
vassal. Dame's Crown is another vassal there.
Yeah, there's only like I think there's like maybe 10 max tags left in the Empire, but that are not players that and they're all just in that one tiny area. There's no reason they should still be alive.
And then we have the Ram Dwarves. Obviously, interesting set of alliances for them. They're allied to Bjarnrik, they're allied to the Wood Elves, and they're allied to the Lake Federation. They, for what seems the first time, had a relatively quiet session, a good bit of expansion for them. When do we see the Ram Dwarves starting to become a factor in player wars?
Um, that honestly depends on what Saranavar thinks about them keeping their alliance with the Lake Fed. Because if they see that as a threat, then I could see them attacking them. Well, right after they finish with Soldier with the help of the Phoenix Empire. Especially with how much control they want over the Serpent Spine.
Yeah, we're reaching a point from a production perspective where some of these dwarven holds and the trade bonuses, etc., there's a lot of value in the Serpent Spine still that the Wood Elves probably wouldn't mind tapping into. Their eco is relatively strong, but from a trade perspective, it's actually quite weak, and they're relying pretty heavily on subsidies from Abencost.
I know from talking with Helena that she does want to move her main trade node eventually, because the Deepwood just leaves in so many directions that it's not worth it. So I would imagine that new trade node's going to be in the Serpent Spine, so
Rather than something like the Flooded Coast, which Everthil would have the ability to pull out of.
yeah, Everthil is just anything that's a coastal tile or a coastal node is going to be too dangerous, especially with Everthil around.
So that'll be interesting. Uh, Do you think Bjarnrik or Lakefed would come to the aid of the Ram Dwarves in that situation? Or is it a point where a smaller player just gets fed to the wolves, essentially?
Folgestat, in their best interest, would want to help because if they lose this current war, which it looks like they will, they're going to need some ally, otherwise you're just going to repeatedly lose and lose more and more land and get weaker.
And do you think that the Phoenix Empire has any real threats if they are able to win this Lakefed war? Or will they be in a almost a kingmaker position where they can choose to tip the sides of any war around the old world?
Um, I think there's some nations they can't really touch because, for instance, Everthil with their navy, there's no way they're ever occupying their main islands. So there's some nations that they can't really like fully beat. But as far as just losing anything, I don't think they'll ever losing anything if they win against Soldier.
And
Except
then
again, maybe Vern with their 700 force limit, but
we've also got our friends Odval Kanza, the Cannon Dwarves, starting to get their act together, I guess you could say. Um, Obviously, we had a few different players. We had the AI in control a number of times. Is there a chance that they may have an impact on the geopolitical scene moving forward, or is it too little too late for our good friends, the Cannon Dwarves?
it the only way I see them surviving is if they get super friendly with Phoenix Empire and just basically just informally a vassal. 'Cause otherwise, that's a lot of dev in the holds that they'd probably want. Phoenix Empire would probably want to take or at least give to an AI vassal because the negative modifiers for controlling. subterranean places.
And then we'll pivot back to Kenor, as a large percentage of the conflict occurred there. Um, Between the Laurent and Bjarnrik War, the second round from a Marhold perspective, Ismeria versus Jaberd, did anything surprise you last session, or did it go as expected in your mind?
I'm surprised how well Arboran and Bjarnrik held out, to be honest, especially of losing Boiscarvel so early in the war, because they left so little at home that they just kind of, you and Vern kind of just walked through their lands. But especially with Arboran not having much professionalism, I know the player, I'll say, does not agree with that guy's philosophy of mercenaries, and so did not like how little professionalism he had.
I believe that there's some missions or national ideas that lend themselves towards mercenaries for Arboran, and I think that's what the plan was there. Yeah, it looks like there's the one idea. I don't know their mission tree particularly well. Are you familiar with it?
Not particularly. I've only looked at the ideas, and I think the maintenance and manpower is neat for like, but more as a if needed situation. I don't think you should be heavily relying on mercenaries.
Yeah, it's interesting with um, Anbennar, the previous age, that particular age bonus lends itself uh, extremely well towards mercenaries, but as soon as that age exits and you start getting into these larger conflicts where army composition and having stacks of the appropriate size matters a little bit more,
Yeah.
mercenaries definitely do start to fall off.
Yeah, the bonuses in the last stage were kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, the 30%
Especially with
shock and
Call of the High Seas minus 50% heavy ship cost.
yep.
So my economy just kind of tanked as soon as it ended.
Which is actually something interesting. Your economy still one of the stronger in the game. Obviously, production income through the roof. Um, During some of those
Yeah.
wars, I believe, yeah, you've been paying relatively heavy subsidies. Um, you lost the naval hegemony, but were able to come back strong and regain it before Eberthil. How have you been able to pump out so much money from this region compared to some of your neighbors, where from a dev perspective, obviously you're up there on the list, but um, there's others whose ecos are nowhere near the size of yours.
You look at the trade goods and then the manufactories in my country, it's all like high quality goods. There's like, I think I have like 10 precursor relic tiles, which by themselves is a lot. I have a lot of fur. The one problem is I don't have a lot of soldiers' household buildings, like tiles. That's the big problem with my nation. So like
Still
if you
doing
look,
okay
I
from a
have,
manpower perspective.
yeah, but if you look at my manufactories, I literally have like I have all my buildings in my country built. So I'm kind of at a point where I've basically peaked, I'd say. Because even when I like dev the provinces, I have to focus right now on building courthouses because otherwise I'm going to go over the governing capacity, which of course is one of the rules. Which the last, it was either the last admin tech or two admin techs ago did help a little bit, but it definitely not ideal still.
Have you considered taking a different idea group than religious as to get that additional governing capacity?
I need religious for the morale. That's the only reason I have it. Like, my morale is already low compared to everyone else's, and especially the 5% naval morale. It isn't much, but as the meme says, it's honest work. Policies are also really nice for religious, obviously, as they are in vanilla too.
Yeah, some of the stronger policies in the game associated with the religious, which is interesting. Yeah, morale of armies, recover army morale. Speed is actually a slept on idea that's extremely valuable in some of these larger wars.
And that and the with naval I get minus 15% morale hit from losing a ship, which when I get that I might be able to like go full naval death stack and maybe push through my navy back to a safer location away from where they're possibly gonna get booted out in Haraf.
And then as we take a look at the great powers list, Phoenix 1, Eberthal 2, they've been there for the majority of the session or season. Laurent has moved steadily up the list. Does anything surprise you at this point, or um, do you think that these 8 are probably going to be there again next week and will most likely be the list moving forward?
I'm surprised that it's Bjarnrik and not the Greek elves. That's the only surprising thing.
Yeah, there is a chance they
Oh, they just
pop
don't have the
back up.
institution.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that will be something to keep an eye on. Obviously, Lake Fed is getting hit by the institution penalty, will pop back into the second slot. Um, but yeah, interesting to see the Greeks are, yeah, still pretty large. Quite a bit of AI for them to still eat in uh, this region. Who knows what Vern and Eberthal's plans are diplomatically as far as the Greeks go, but it'll be interesting to see what kind of impact they have on the larger stage moving forward.
Yeah, the Greeks are in a great place despite being AI for so long. Like when signups were still going on, I contemplated putting them first, but I decided not to just because I knew how powerful they were. I had a practice run as them where I think it was like almost 1600 and I was already at 2k dev just from deving my land. Because they get 15% in their ideas, which is just ridiculous.
And then from a diplomacy perspective, obviously the New Worlders had to deal with Eberthil and Vern, relatively aggressive and quick expansion, but relations seem to have been peaceful between yourself and Boyascarvo from the get-go. Did you ever consider taking an alternative tact? And I know at one point you were allied with Eberthil. Um, was there ever any discussion between the two of you in moving into Boyascarvo or moving into Vern and potentially taking over a larger chunk of the New World?
Um, I'd say at the very beginning, like maybe sessions 3 or 4, I thought maybe I should expand more into the new world, but I think based on how things turned out with Everthill and Vern, especially Everthill joining against Boiscarvo and myself in this war, I'm glad I didn't, because my army quality is not anywhere near Boiscarvo, and I kind of need their infantry to do anything against them.
And then obviously we still have the Phoenix Empire's war against the Lake Federation. We have Vern Boyascarvo conflict ongoing, as well as a few smaller ones. But what other player conflicts can we expect coming into this Saturday's session?
I think that's a tough one. I think Bjarnrik might try to go for a move on the small country again. Well, I say again, but I mean, I think they're just going to make a move against the small country, but I have no evidence of this.
And then
And
from
that's
my perspective, I think, yep, Bjarnrik into small country is probable. Um, Arbaran's an interesting one to watch based on their current alliances. Bjarnrik, Arbaran, and Cyranovar, pretty powerful trio. If Arbaran is the one declaring the wars, um, that'll be something interesting. Danica may get eaten, just based on being in between those three. That's something I could see happen, or obviously Arboran into small country, or Appenkost um, into small country. Uh, they've begun expanding a little bit more aggressively off their island. It'll be interesting to see what else they do moving forward.
I'm assuming is Wesdam and Pearl's Edge both vassals of you and Vern?
Wesdam is currently independent. Pearl's Edge
Okay.
is a vassal.
Yeah, so the Amenkost is probably going to expand into Wesdam while you're still occupied in this war. But as far as player wars, I would like to say that everyone's going to go after Vern now because they look weak, but that's just me being on a bad side of a war and over and hoping too much. But
It's interesting, Vern, the way things have shaped out with their neighbors. Obviously, Eberthil is not in a position to do anything against them. Um, Ismaria probably also can't take advantage. Arboran probably could, but there's the truce, and then they're still recovering from their existing wars. Um, it's going to be interesting to see what happens between uh, Vern and some of the outsiders from an imperial perspective if they choose to encroach.
it does kind of weird me out when you looked at Vern for a second that they still have so many troops back home when they're allied to all of their neighbors, essentially.
Yeah, Vern, it's a oversight from a force limit perspective, to be quite honest. I don't think anyone realized just how powerful the crown colonies stacking with the 200% vassal force limit contribution was going to be.
Yeah.
Um, it's created this interesting position, and their economy is not particularly strong, but um, the subsidies they're receiving from Eberthil and Small Country, uh, tremendous amount of money flowing into their country to
I
support
mean,
their army.
their economy could be strong, but from the looks of it, looking at their income, they still have the monopolies, which when I made my video, I was not a fan of, but
Yeah, I'll actually
it's,
blow up Curb's spot here. It's a little secret that he's been trying to utilize, but um, from a monopoly perspective, he's been able to get to 99% mercantilism, which gives him bonuses to provincial trade modifiers as well as global power um, from all of his various colonial nations. So, from a
yeah,
trade perspective, when he does choose to turn it on, he'll be able to take a large amount of trade um,
yeah.
from whatever node he so chooses.
I think the one problem with that is that even at like 100% mercantilism, like if he tries to take from Eberthil at all, Eberthil can just build more light ships than he could ever hope to have and just take it anyways.
Yeah, it's interesting. He hasn't upgraded many of his centers of trade, which is something that he could be doing if he did want to compete from a trade perspective. But it seems like he's happy to just play nice with his neighbors and
Yeah.
receive the subsidies. Any final thoughts to leave with our viewers?
Uh, I think next session is going to be very interesting. Going to be a lot of conflicts to sort out. I think on my end, I'm going to be having a very stressful session, but it should be very enjoyable for the viewers.
Well, thank you. Appreciate you taking the time and joining us. And I would say good luck, but I know we're on opposite sides of this war, so I hope your navy burns in flames.
Oh, okay.